Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sterling Live. My name is Caitlin Brower. I am Sterling's social media manager, along with your host for Sterling Live. I'm very excited for today's episode. We have a really great topic, and we have two really awesome experts with us to dive into it. So as you can see above me, here are my two guests. We have Heather Pelton, Head of Operations, Investigative Services, and Mandy Burkett, Manager, Investigations. And our topic, as you can see on the bottom of the screen, is navigating executive investigations for confident decision making. Again, these two are experts in the executive investigations area, so I'm excited to dive into that topic today. I would love for my guests now to introduce themselves to our audience. So Heather, you are no stranger to Sterling Live. Again, can you just introduce yourself to our audience real quick?
Yes, absolutely. So I am Heather Pelton. I have been with Sterling Diligence for the past 7 years. I started my tenure here as an investigator in business due diligence. I moved over to leading our executive investigation team for the past handful of years, and I now lead the operations for all of Sterling Diligence's business lines. Prior to coming over to Sterling, I worked in the government security clearance industry for 10 years.
Well, happy to have you back on Sterling Live with us. Mandy, first time on Sterling Live. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've been with Sterling for almost 5 years. The first 4 focused primarily on executive investigations. I've recently added some due diligence responsibilities as well. And my background prior to Sterling was in law and nonprofit work.
All right. Like I said, two experts here. So they're going to be answering a lot of good questions from me. But if you have any questions, if you're watching live right now on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, you can ask questions as well. Just go ahead and put them in the comment section across each of these platforms, and I will get them over to Heather and Mandy as I see fit throughout the episode. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'd like to dive into a quick overview of executive investigations. I feel like it's a mouthful, but we'll get through it this episode, I promise. So Heather, I'll say it's going to come up many times, clearly. Heather, I'll start with you. What are executive investigations and how do they differ from Sterling's standard background check offerings?
Yeah, definitely. I'll first highlight that Sterling Diligence is what we consider to be the investigative arm of Sterling. We're an independent division that conducts these deeper dive investigations we're going to talk about this session. But to answer your question, the standard background check that Sterling is best known for is your pre-hire verifications and checks like criminal credit, global sanctions, maybe some drug testing. And it's boiled down to verifying or confirming or refuting what a candidate disclosed about themselves on a resume or application. With these sorts of checks, turnaround time and cost are imperative as they're typically higher volume and they need to get folks in the door quickly. Mm-hmm. What Mandy and I focus on are the exec investigations that are deep dive full investigations. So more of a premium service with very close attention to detail, an extra level of care and service with each investigation. So our team will use a resume or a profile of the candidate that's provided to us in order to build a full investigation utilizing Sterling's robust capabilities in tandem with our investigative analysts to paint a full picture of a candidate's background. So we'll dive into the process and things uncovered throughout this conversation, but in general, we're really looking for things a candidate may have omitted or exaggerated as part of their professional history when they're going for a higher level role. This is a very similar process to the business due diligence that Caitlin, you and I had discussed a few months back. But the main difference is these executive investigations are meant for hiring decisions or board membership decisions. And so FCRA regulations apply and are followed.
That's a good call out there. And yes, if you did not watch our due diligence episode, it is across our social media platforms. Heather did join me on that one. It was really good information. But to kind of dive deeper into, what you can find within an executive investigation, Mandy, I want to pop that question over to you, kind of, letting us know what would we uncover in one of these?
As Heather stated, it's really a full picture of a subject of our investigation. So it'll show the business, legal, and financial background of that individual. Our full scope investigations include property ownership records. It includes employment and business affiliations, board of director roles, education, licenses, as well as any financial registrations an individual may have or regulatory actions related to those registrations. Our court records include criminal, civil, bankruptcy, as well as judgments, liens, and UCCs, which when taken in connection with a credit report can give a full financial picture. Global sanctions, and our reports are rounded out with press and social media. So what does their online presence look like? Our research is mostly focused in those jurisdictions that we know belong to this individual, but most of our research really does have a nationwide scope.
Heather, the service is called Executive Investigations. Does that mean it's only for C-level employees?
That's probably one of the biggest misconceptions of what we do here due to the name, but the short answer is no. We did aptly name them executive investigations because the majority are conducted on executives or C-suite level hires, but we do have various tiers or scopes we recommend to our clients based on the role or position they're hiring for. So, vice presidents and board members are not necessarily executives, but are important roles that may warrant a deeper dive than your standard background check. And also what we deem high impact hires, those folks can benefit from these investigations. So if you're in IT security, someone with access to financial information, maybe an investor relations role, a principal of a school, the GM of a hospital, even anyone who could work in someone's home at the end of the day and have access to a bunch of things or information, whoever's hiring them could benefit from these investigations. So to go a little bit further, we really recommend these. They are, costlier, they take longer to fulfill, but we recommend them for people who cannot be easily replaced within your organization.
Okay.
Maybe they have specialized skills or autonomy. And if you really think about it, a role or position that has the autonomy, the access, and even the opportunity to commit fraud or theft with little to no detection, these are the prime candidates for these types of investigations. So it really boils down to what is beneficial for your organization. And I'll also add that because the range of the roles can vary, like I just mentioned, we have recommendations based on our history and what clients find helpful, but we can also customize our scoping and components as requested.
Yeah, really great outline there of who these investigations are for. Something that you both have mentioned, and I think we're going to see the theme throughout this episode, is taking a deeper dive on an individual. So with that, I'm sure some of our audience, they've got that legal mindset on now. Okay, so we're taking a deeper dive. Heather, you mentioned that staying within the FCRA guidelines. So Mandy, can you touch on the legal and ethical considerations when conducting one of these investigations?
Yeah, absolutely. The two main considerations are consent and reportability. So we do have to have consent to run an executive investigation, and that is an employment-related permissible purpose. So that allows us to access some other information that you couldn't access in a standard background screening. Executive investigations also, as has been mentioned multiple times, follows the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So these are federal guidelines put in place to protect the subject of the investigation. But when we follow those, it also protects our clients from making decisions based on factors that they shouldn't be considering based on federal guidelines. So for example, if a subject makes under $75,000, criminal non-convictions would not be reported, civil filings outside of 7 years, bankruptcies outside of 10 years. So this, again, protects the subject of the investigation when they're under that salary threshold, but also protects the client from having information they shouldn't be considering when making those hiring decisions.
Right. Earlier, excuse me, a little echo there. Earlier, it was mentioned kind of, where you're looking. So you're looking at things like credit reports. Someone mentioned online presence, social media in particular. I'm curious, though, what are other sources that you're looking at, or specifically methods that our investigations team is using? So Heather, I'll kick that question to you.
Yeah, so our process involves a triangulation or a multi-level research approach. Our experienced investigators will research open source public records via database subscriptions, going directly to the primary source like courts, recorders' offices, Secretary of State's offices, just to name a few. They'll also comb through press and media articles and databases, journals, newspapers, social media platforms. We'll Google various terms and names that we uncover in order to find new information or substantiate employment or credentials of a candidate. So if something isn't aligning, we'll start going down rabbit holes as warranted in order to provide as much of a background to the client as possible. And an example of this could be, instead of just listing out that we found a civil filing, here's the caption, the investigator will comb through the available documentation from the courts and summarize the findings, just to give the client as much information as they can without overcomplicating it for them.
Got it. And then I think top of mind for many people, whether it's a standard background check or an executive investigation, is accuracy. Are we being accurate? What are we finding? Is it real information and things like that? So Mandy, can you dive a little bit deeper into, how are we ensuring that these, in-depth investigations are accurate?
Sure. There are general and specific considerations for accuracy. So specifically, we're looking at, does this record belong to the individual that we're conducting the investigation on? Does a criminal record include date of birth, social security number? Does a civil filing include an employment that we've already verified throughout the report, a board of director role? Depending on the type of case, if it's a foreclosure, we're looking to see if we've verified that property related to the subject. And those are the specific things we're looking for to tie to an individual. But in general, we have a multi-tiered approach to also our report writing. So it starts with a researcher who's looking at the research, analyzing it, determining reportability. It goes to a drafter who then checks to see if that analysis is sound and ultimately determines what goes in the report. And then it goes through a full quality review. So we have somebody who's looking at the totality of the information, the research, the draft. Is everything there? Is everything accurate? And then finally, it goes through a review for making sure it's a comprehensive and complete report. So are we providing a clear view of our results to the client?
I want to move now into, we touched on the process a little bit in that first section of questions. But I want to dive into the process a little bit more. And I want to put our global hats on now. I want to think globally. We talk about it a lot as an organization. So Heather, can you dive into a little bit about global executive investigations for international hires?
Yeah, definitely. So, we do have the capability to perform these investigations around the world. Our investigations will utilize Sterling's existing global capabilities in tandem with resources worldwide. So I'll say that while we offer these full investigations in most countries, information may be limited in various locations. However, we have a lot of boots on the ground in hundreds of regions with experts who know local laws and obtain the information they can for us. At times, a client may not even know a candidate or a subject has ties to another country. Maybe they think they were in the US and we uncover they studied abroad or worked abroad for a various period of time. And so as part of the premium service I mentioned earlier, our team will reach out to the client and partner with them to recommend best practices based on what we're seeing. Do we recommend a full investigation? Do we recommend that they were only there a short period of time 20 years ago? What records are available in that region? Is it worth, pursuing a full investigation or just maybe using Sterling's global crim checks and things like that? So we do have robust capabilities for investigations all over.
Good to know. So for everyone listening, hiring internationally, you can definitely come to us for any type of an executive investigation. So again, let's dive into the process. And I know we discussed a little bit earlier, like what you can find, but Mandy, I know you have specific examples of what can be uncovered in an executive investigation.
There is a lot that can be uncovered as we discussed earlier. There's many sections of the report, and each section has their own unique things that can be found within that investigation. So in property ownership, we might uncover property owned in a trust or an entity closely related to the individual of the subject of the investigation. Or in employment, we may find some undisclosed employments, short-term employments, maybe multiple short-term employments, which show a pattern. Under business affiliations, it may uncover a conflict for the client. Education, we may see a claim degree that was not actually awarded, or a license that's claimed to be active and has actually been expired. We may find some disciplinary actions associated with those licenses. In court records, I think the main consideration for criminal, civil, and bankruptcy is the pattern that we uncover. So maybe one DUI isn't a concern, but 3 DUIs shows a pattern. Maybe one bankruptcy in 20 years is not a concern, but 3 bankruptcies over 20 years shows a pattern of bad financial decisions. And so we're really looking for those patterns in those legal records. And then credit history, are they paying their bills on time? Do they have collections accounts out there? Global sanctions, are they a politically exposed person, either directly or through a relationship, a spouse, a parent, a business partner? And then press and social media just shows their online presence. Do they have a habit of commenting negatively in the press about an employer or other individuals? And so it can show a pattern of harassment or discrimination. And these are just a few of the things that can be uncovered in each section of the report.
So as a follow-up question for you with those findings, how is that mitigating risks for organizations?
Well, I think one of the biggest ways it mitigates risk is it just protects the company's reputation. So if they're making a hiring decision, they can prevent maybe a bad act by somebody that's coming into their organization. Or if it's a high-profile hire, they can mitigate the risk ahead of time and know kind of if there's going to be concerns in the public setting. And so it can protect the company's reputation. And then, as we've stated multiple times, FCRA is going to protect the client from making hiring decisions on information that's barred by federal considerations. So we can protect the client both through following guidelines and then the information provided.
With the findings too, what are examples of what can be used and what can't be used? Probably more importantly, the emphasis on what can't be used.
Specifically, the FCRAs we discussed earlier, if they're make under 75,000, it limits providing non-convictions for criminal offenses, civil filings outside of 7 years, and bankruptcies outside of 10 years. So we just have this kind of general understanding that anything adverse outside of 7 years probably isn't going to be reported if they make under 75,000. If they make over 75,000, this opens up what we're able to report, and it can expose some of those patterns that we discussed earlier. So maybe someone's charged with 3 DUIs. The first one was dismissed. The second one was reduced to a careless driving, and the third one they were convicted of DUI. We might not see that full picture if they make under 75,000, but if they make over 75,000, we're going to be able to report all that, and they're going to be able to see that full picture. And then there's also some state and local rules that are in place that we also have to follow. So New York and California added protections for their residents. So New York, there's a pre-offer conditions put in place, so we can't do criminal or driving checks for someone who, if they haven't had an offer extended. Or California has a very strict guidelines as far as what we can report, so that really follows kind of that under 75,000 FCRA rule with some added protections. So again, we're looking at that. You're probably not going to see anything adverse outside of 7 years if the person is a resident of California. And then New York City and the District of Columbia also have protections put in place for their residents as far as credit reports. So in order to report credit in those areas, we have to have information from the client that says that there is an exception that allows us to pull credit for this individual. So there are a lot of different considerations to take into account, and we're taking all this into account when providing that information to our client ahead of time, again, mitigating the risk when they're making their hiring decisions.
All right, so we have talked about what can be uncovered, what you can and cannot use. Heather, my next question for you is that when these things pop up within the investigation, what are the steps that need to be taken?
Yeah, so I will say that unlike, Sterling's core products are a lot of times they're scored or adjudicated for the client to know, which way they should go and lean on their decision making because it needs to be quick. But these are investigations, and so we do not score them. We do not adjudicate them. We're just here to provide the information to the client so the best decision can be made by an organization for a hire of this magnitude usually. So with that said, a red flag can be different based on each industry. As Mandy mentioned, one may not be a big deal, but 3 DUIs could show a pattern. If something is identified that a client is going to question, our first step is to ensure each employer client is working with their legal team. Adverse action would apply, as these are employment decisions, like we mentioned. And so just being aware of that process. And so Sterling's client support teams will partner with the employer to ensure the correct processes are followed. And we here, in executive investigations, we're doing the fulfillment, the drafting, writing of reports. So if there's a question on a record found or a client needs more clarification, we're happy to dig a little bit further, get them the information they need in order to make the best decision.
Heather, I'm going to stay with you for the next question, kind of as we wrap up the conversation around the actual process. How should human resources teams think about these investigations as a part of, the entire hiring process?
Yeah, I will say Mandy nor I are in HR, but ultimately our investigations are there to lend insight into someone's character and business performance. So these teams should really think about their company's reputation, their brand, potential financial implications if the wrong person is hired for a certain role. If just keeping in mind that if something comes to light once they're in the role, it can damage the reputation. It could also damage their employee morale, the trust, within the organization, or even the productivity.
I'd like to move now because I know everyone, a lot of information has been shared already in the last 23 minutes. But everyone's always wanting to look for, that prime time example. So how does this actually go out into the real world? How are we actually using it with clients? So I do want to talk about some clients and then some other real-time examples as well. So can we share any examples from clients that have used our executive investigations? Mandy, I'll start with you here, and then Heather, you can follow up.
Yeah, I will say most of the candidates we look at are relatively kind of uneventful for adverse history, but we've seen some interesting things, especially in the last several months. We had an executive director who had a history of showing up to work intoxicated. A regulatory agency who had oversight over that industry had disciplined this individual. We were able to find that through license and regulatory searches. This license was not reported on their resume, which I can only assume was in the hopes that we did not uncover the disciplinary action associated with that license. And then we recently had a CFO candidate who had some major debt, had a history of bankruptcies. I think they had 3 bankruptcies and 8 financial related civil filings. And so obviously not a great candidate for a CFO position. Mm-hmm. And then we've also seen and had a couple in a row with high profile individuals with some assault charges. And so this may answer a question for the client about, is this person able to handle the stress of the role that we're looking to hire them for? And so those are just kind of a few of the examples of the questions that might be answered throughout our investigations.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback on Mandy's examples where we have some healthcare industry clients where we've seen, not one specific example, but sometimes some directors of organizations, we see some serious financial concerns pop up, which leads to the question of if they might be going for these positions in order to take advantage of the elderly, if they're in a care home for their own personal financial gain. So just those are the types of things that the questions that these investigations can answer when it comes to these findings. We also recently had an existing Sterling Financial Services client who they were hiring a chief procurement officer, decided they would test out our executive investigation product, and we uncovered a bunch of liens that hadn't come up just because we can go outside of those parameters at times, which is definitely concerning given the role he was up for.
Definitely. So moving into some, it's great to see like what we're doing with clients, we're helping them, but there's always things going on in the news. We're seeing it on social media. We're seeing it when we turn on the TV. So there are real-time examples, real-time scandals and things like that. So Heather, I want to talk about a couple, just keeping it high level, not naming any names, but talking about scenarios and, what the organization or team could have done differently to avoid it. And then how do you think it's going to impact, the team moving forward?
Yeah. As you mentioned, I'm sure everyone on this live has heard of plenty of unethical or disgraced executive hires in the media over the years. Some common examples of what leads to the downfall of these folks are, financial fraud, harassment charges, unequal treatment of employees, theft of company information, or misleading communication. Some of them had a history of or a pattern of this behavior, which would have been uncovered with a deeper dive investigation prior to them being hired or promoted. And our team, if our team was involved or, conducting these investigations, we could have uncovered this via some civil litigation research. We're not here just to research named parties in courts. We can dig around, figure out if they're tied to lawsuits in any other capacities, sex offender searches, criminal checks, even through various verifications or we uncover omitted employments and why were they omitted. These situations can be very damaging for organizations, as I mentioned earlier, and not only with internal morale and productivity issues, but even bigger to the consumer, an investor or a shareholder who may move their money elsewhere as a result. And so this topic actually brings up a chance to discuss the opportunity to conduct update or refresh reports for these higher level hires as well. What has happened since that person was hired? Because while some of them had a history or a pattern of bad behavior, some were probably fine at first and it wouldn't have been uncovered initially. But as their fame or their clout has grown, has it led to bad decisions that maybe didn't necessarily come to light just yet. And so I always recommend also doing an updated check to ensure all is clear, whether it's every year, every 5 years, however often an organization wishes, but can definitely save you from some potentially negative outcomes.
Absolutely. I know I learned a lot in this episode, so I know our audience did as well. Some really useful information and kind of, giving organizations that, moment to think of, could this potentially happen to us? Do we need to invest in a service like this? So really awesome stuff from the two of you. I want to give our audience one final chance to ask any questions they may have. So again, if you are watching live on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, please go ahead and put any final questions you have for Heather and Mandy in the comment section across each of these platforms. As we wait for any final questions to come in, I want to gather some final thoughts from the two of you, just as we wrap up the episode. So Mandy, I will start with you, just final thoughts from today.
Well, Sterling Diligence Executive Investigations provide a robust, deep dive, full report of the individual as we've discussed. So it can protect your client from misdeeds of a bad actor, or it can help that client know the information ahead of time. So if they're making a high profile hire, what negative publicity may occur, and they can prepare for that. And then Sterling Diligence is here to help. So we want to provide the best information possible for you to make all your hiring decisions. And we look forward to working with you and providing that to you.
Thank you for that. Heather, final thoughts for today.
Yeah, so as I think I mentioned it earlier, but these investigations are pricey and more time consuming than an average background check. But as I hope you've seen with some of our examples in this discussion, they are worth the investment. Our team is full of skilled investigators from all different backgrounds who work tirelessly to uncover anything that can help your organization make the best decision possible.
I think that is great. And again, really solid team, as Heather had mentioned. Reach out to us if you would like to, learn more, partner with us. You can always go to our website, sterlingcheck.com. We do have an executive investigations area for you to look at. You can also reach out on social media. We have all information there as well. With that being said, there are no further comments or questions at this time. I want to thank our live audience for tuning in. And if you're watching on demand, thank you as always. Love giving great content to you week after week on Sterling Live. And thank you to my guests, Mandy and Heather. I appreciate it. I hope to see you back on another episode. But again, thank you both. And thank you to our audience. And I'll see you next time.
Thanks, Caitlin.
Of course. Thank you.